No calendar, no inbox, no boss. For a moment, that sounds like freedom. But then a colder thought creeps in. What did people even do with a day like that? You have been taught to imagine your ancestors as desperate, scraping, starving, working every waking hour just to survive until sunset. It is the image built into almost every textbook diagram. The hunched caveman dragging a spear through the mud, exhausted, one bad hunt away from death. It feels obvious. It feels true. It is almost completely wrong. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Borshay Lee did something almost nobody had bothered to do before. He did not guess about how hunter-gatherers spent their time. He measured it. Lee lived among the Jew/Hoansi-San people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last populations on Earth still living a foraging lifestyle, and he tracked exactly how many hours they spent finding food. The number he found was not 60 hours a week. It was not even 40. It was around 15. 15 hours. To eat, to live, to feed a family. The rest of the week was not spent collapsed in exhaustion. It was spent resting, talking, making tools, telling stories, doing what looked, uncomfortably, a lot like leisure. Why does that number feel impossible? Because you were raised inside a story that says work is the natural state of being human, and rest is something you have to earn. That story is younger than you think. It is not evolution talking. It is economics talking, and it has been whispering in your ear since before you could speak. The anthropologist Marshall Salins looked at data like Lee's and made a claim that shocked academia when he published it in 1968. He called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more. Affluent because they wanted less, and what they wanted, they could usually get within a few hours of effort. Affluence, Salins argued, is not about producing more. It is about the gap between what you want and what you have. Close that gap, and you are rich, even with nothing in your pockets. Sit with that for a second. Your ancestors may have been wealthier, by that definition, than you are right now. So what did they actually fill their time with, if not constant labor? Mornings likely began slowly. No clock dictating the start of the day, just the sun and the sounds of camp waking up. A small group might set out to gather roots, berries, nuts, insects in many regions packed with more protein than people assume. Others might track animals, not in the dramatic chase you picture, but in long, patient, quiet observation, reading footprints and broken twigs like a language. Foraging itself was not mindless collecting. It required an enormous mental map. Which plants were poisonous? Which were only edible in certain seasons? Where water pooled after rain 3 months ago? This was knowledge passed down, tested, refined, and argued over, generation after generation. It was, in every meaningful sense, a form of science. And when the gathering was done for the day, often by early afternoon, what came next? Nothing urgent. That is the part that is hardest to imagine. There was no shift to clock into, no errands piling up. There was talking. Long, unhurried, looping conversation. The kind modern life rarely leaves room for. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years recording conversations among the Jew/Hoansi and found something striking. During the day, most talk was practical. Complaints, coordination, gossip about who did what to whom. But at night, around the fire, the subject shifted almost entirely to story. Myths, histories, jokes, songs. The kind of talk that builds a shared world inside a group's head. Not because it produces anything, but because it connects people to each other and to the past. Doesn't that sound a little like what you do at the end of your own day? You scroll, you talk, you watch something. You seek out story, even now, even exhausted, even after 8 or 10 or 12 hours of labor your ancestors never had to do. That impulse did not appear in you randomly. It might be one of the oldest habits you own. Children in these societies were rarely put to formal instruction. Instead, they learned by watching, by playing versions of adult tasks, by being folded gradually into the rhythm of the group. Play was not separate from learning. Play was learning, disguised as fun, which is possibly the most efficient education system humans have ever run and then quietly abandoned. There was also art. Long before agriculture, long before cities, humans were carving beads, painting cave walls, decorating tools that did not need decoration to function. Function alone did not explain it. Something else did. A need to mark existence, to say, in pigment and bone, I was here, and this mattered to me. Where did that need go? It didn't go anywhere. It is still in you. It just gets squeezed into the margins of a life that treats decoration, story, and rest as luxuries you have to justify. This is where the anthropologist James Sussman's research becomes almost uncomfortable to sit with. Sussman spent decades studying the same Jew/Huanzi communities and others like them, and he argues that the modern relationship to work is historically bizarre, not normal. For the vast majority of the roughly 300,000 years humans have existed, work was intermittent, communal, and tightly bound to actual need. You gathered what you needed, you stopped. Nobody was rewarded for doing more than necessary, because more than necessary meant nothing. There was no bank account to fill. There was only today and maybe tomorrow. That changed with agriculture. Once you can store surplus grain, you can also hoard it, guard it, tax it, and eventually force other people to produce more of it than they need. Sussman traces the entire architecture of scarcity, ambition, and status anxiety back to that single invention. The idea that more is always better, because now, for the first time, more could actually be stored. Before that invention, what would have been the point of overworking? There was no warehouse to fill, no retirement fund, no promotion, just enough food for today, and the rest of the day left over to be simply a person among other people. None of this means life was easy. Disease was constant. Infant mortality was brutal. Predators were real. Conflict happened, and comfort as you understand it barely existed. This is not a fantasy of a lost paradise. It is something stranger and more specific. It is evidence that the sheer amount of hours humans now spend laboring is not some ancient inheritance clawed up from necessity. It is a relatively recent invention dressed up to look inevitable. So when you feel exhausted at the end of another 10-hour day, and some old voice in your head whispers that this is just what being human requires, that voice is lying to you. Or at least, it is only telling you part of a much longer story. Your body was not built for the modern work week. It was built for something closer to what Lee measured in the Kalahari. Short bursts of focused effort, long stretches of rest, conversation, and story. A rhythm that treated leisure not as a reward you earn, but as the default state you return to. Maybe that is why rest never quite feels like enough anymore. Maybe the itch you feel on a lazy Sunday, the guilt that creeps in when you are doing nothing productive, is not a personal failing. Maybe it is a mismatch, a few hundred generations old, between a mind built for 15 hours of necessary effort and a world that demands 50. Isn't it strange that doing less might be closer to your original nature than doing more? So you wake up tomorrow and the alarm goes off, and the calendar fills in, and the inbox waits. For a moment, that feels like the only way life has ever worked. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere in you is a much older rhythm, one that gathered enough and then simply stopped, sat by the fire and told a story.